up if you can hear me okay. Okay, good. All right. So I'm not going to use the headphones. I'll just use the mic that's built into the display. Okay, so, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk to you guys. I'm always excited when I have the opportunity to talk to folks that want to get involved in product management. It was my career for over 30 years, and it was a very fun and exciting thing to do. And I've had the opportunity recently to do a bit of coaching with up-and-coming product managers, and it's very gratifying to be able to help new folks that want to get into the profession, or people that are just starting and need some advice or help, or just a bit of moral support is sometimes helpful too. So let me get my little deck going here. I think I have it in a way that I can share it with you easily. Okay, let's have a look. Da-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da. Here we go. Excellent. Very good. All right, I'm assuming that you guys can see this now. Very good. All right, hold on. There we go. Okay. So, there's a story behind this this presentation, and the story goes like this. Quite a few years ago, and I'm not going to tell you how many, I was in a job interview. It was actually for a job at 3Com. I don't know if you guys are old enough or young enough to remember 3Com. They were one of the very first computer networking companies. And I'd gone through a bunch of interviews with different people, and I was interviewing there to be director of product management for their home networking group. And it was back in the days when Wi-Fi technology had just appeared. I was sat in the room with the VP of engineering for the home networking business, and he asked me, how do I validate a product concept? How do I know whether or not to proceed with a product? Well, for some reason this is coming out black. I don't know why this is coming out black. Hold on a second. Am I having a technical problem? Oh, there we go. Okay, don't know why. Okay, so this was his question. How do you decide whether or not to proceed with a product? And no one had ever asked me that question before. And I've been a product manager for quite a few years. And back in those days, there wasn't really anything like what you guys have, the resources that you have available. I just stood up at the whiteboard and I talked through the process that I'd started to use over the first few years of my career. And the result was this slide. So I will talk you through it, and then we can have some discussion afterwards. So the basic idea here is that there's a new product concept that appears, and sometimes, depending on the type of product manager you're on, depending on the type of company you're working at, that product concept can come from you, or it could come from your visionary CEO, or it could come from your product ideation department, or whatever. It depends on what type of company you're working at. So that's where things start. So someone comes up and says, "Hey, we should make a widget that does X, Y, or Z." So the way that I looked at it is I basically said, look, when you're trying to validate whether or not this product concept is worthy of pursuit, there's two categories of things that you need to take into consideration. And I just call these external data points and internal data points. So I'll go through the external data points first of all. And some of these are going to just be obvious to you guys, I think. But first and foremost, I always found when I was a product manager that if you have the opportunity to actually talk to customers, people that are actually using the product or using the product category, it's always a very good place to start, because talking to people who are actually using the product, or if you're using the product yourself, or if colleagues in your company are using the product, that's always a good place to start, to get their insights, to understand what their pain points are and what their needs are. the next category that I've got here is competitive intelligence, and obviously it's very, very helpful to understand what's going on in the competitive marketplace, who's doing what, you know, what your competitors are up to, what the market dynamics look like, what the competitive landscape looks like, and sometimes what I found is that there's kind of this can actually be kind of an unhealthy thing, because sometimes people get so hung up with, well, XYZ company has done this, and so, you know, should we even do it? And I'm always reminded of how Apple entered the music player market with the very first iPod. At that time, there were probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 companies that made pretty good MP3 music players. And it was back at in the days of Napster. I'm showing my age here. It was the emergence of digital music and sort of the liberation of digital music. You know, there were a lot of companies that had MP3 players, and Apple decided to get into that business, and they basically changed the game with the introduction of the iPod. And so, you know, the product manager at Apple could have simply said, well, you know, there's already 6 companies that are in this business, and they're already selling products, and, you know, the category's been established, and, you know, is it a good idea to even enter? So competitive intelligence is useful, but you need to understand how it fits in the context of what you're trying to do. Okay, published research, always great to read, plenty of published research. In most areas of technology, there's usually some pretty good market research companies doing research, and you need to be a little bit careful with those companies because their business is selling information. And, you know, I always found it interesting that, you know, when you get right down to it and you ask yourself, well, how do they get the information? Well, the way they get the information is they ask people like you. so, you know, you're the customer, but you're also the supplier. It's kind of an odd relationship. It is good to just read the published research and understand it as a data point. But again, don't get too hung up on, well, I read in this market research report that this market's growing at this rate and da, 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 da. It's just a data point. It's just another data point to take into consideration. The other thing that I did is I established dialogues with the people that wrote those reports, with the market analysts. And I talked to a number of researchers, market researchers that wrote the reports, and they're usually very happy to talk to you because they want to try and extract information from you. And obviously, you've got to be a little careful about what you do and do not share with those analysts. So it's good. And you know, when I used to go to trade shows, I'd meet with them and I'd go out for a drink with them and just, you know, socialize with them and chat with them. And, you know, many of them I'm still kind of pals with, and they helped me over the years and I helped them over the years. So that's you know, they're good guys to know. Market dynamics in general, just as kind of a generic thing. Just to understand, I mean, the way to think about the concept of market dynamics is, you know, if you were at a party or something and someone that you hadn't met before, you know, started talking to you and said, you know, tell me about the market that your company plays in, and you gave like a 3-minute summary. You know, that's kind of at a macro level. It's good to understand, you know, what the market dynamics are, what's going on out there. Technology trends are very important. In the business that I was in, which was, I mean, my entire career was basically hardware products. And, you know, it seems to me that a lot of product managers these days are not doing hardware, they're doing SaaS, and they're doing, you know, software and mobile apps and all that good stuff, which is great. But I think technology trends are also important for that category as well, trying to understand, you know, what software tools are important and other areas of technology that can help accelerate product development and help bring new products and new ideas to market. Channel insights, again, it's more kind of a little bit of a hardware-centric data point, but you know, in the business that I was in, the channel was always very, very important. The distribution channel is what I mean. So, you know, I work for GoPro, I work for Flip Video, I work for 3Com, I work for, you know, a bunch of other different companies, Adaptec, and, you know, the channel, the way that the product gets from your company into the hands of the end user is always a very important part of the process, because if you can't get your product easily to the ultimate end user, you're going to have a real problem. And you know, understanding the challenges that the people in the distribution channel are facing is a really important thing to get your head around, to be able to understand what things you need to provide with the product. You know, what support tools do you need to be creating to help, you know, someone, a distributor, or someone, a reseller, you know, sell the product, or, you know, promote the product. And again, these are very kind of hardware-centric comments, but I think it also holds true for the types of channels that exist today in terms of the way that apps are distributed and other things like that. So let's talk about the internal data points. First and foremost, understanding the core competency of your organization is probably the first and most important thing to be able to do. And I like to tell the story, or actually I don't really like to tell this particular story, but the story illustrates the point quite well, which is the story of when I was at GoPro, and Nick, our CEO, called me into his office and said to me that he really wanted to figure out a way to make a quadcopter, a drone, or whatever you want to call it. They had different names at that time. And, you know, he asked me, because at that time I was doing product related work, but it was mostly through partnerships. And he asked me to go and find companies that knew about how to make cameras fly, basically. And so I did. I worked on that project for about 1.5 years, and I came back with a bunch of companies that were very, very interested in partnering with us. And the decision was made to not do a partnership, but instead to build the competency from scratch at GoPro. And that's what the company chose to do. I felt at the time that that was a big thing to take on, and it was a huge thing to take on, because if your core competency is imaging and camera technology, and you decide that you want to make robots that fly, basically, to carry the cameras, that's an entirely different core competency. So, but that's what the company chose to do. And, you know, the GoPro Karma quadcopter was launched about 4 years after that. It took us about 4 years to actually build that product. And it was a massive disaster. And unfortunately, the product was recalled a few weeks after the initial shipments were made, because they were falling out of the sky. And ultimately, the product was discontinued. So to me, that's an illustration, and kind of an unfortunate illustration, of when a company decides to venture into a product category that's not its core competency. And in fact, it's interesting now, because when you look at GoPro today is very, very much how GoPro was when it first started, which is it's a camera company, and it's focused very much on cameras and accessories. And interestingly, you know, one of GoPro's core competencies, I always felt, was actually its branding. The GoPro brand is incredibly strong, and it's interesting to see they've just launched some lifestyle products, some clothing and other things like that, which I always thought would be a great opportunity for the company to be able to leverage its brand. So, so yeah, core competency, very, very important. Got to make sure that you're able to deliver the product in a way that leverages your core competency. Okay, so next one for internal is exec staff expectations, and this is pretty important. It's very important, actually, because understanding what the exec staff expects from you as a product manager, and from the product concept that you're trying to promote and get the company to pursue, is really important. And e-staff expectations are going to vary, obviously, depending on the function of the e-staff member. For example, you know, the chief financial officer is going to be looking at the P&L, and they're going to be saying, okay, how's this thing going to make money for us? The operations guy is going to be trying to understand, you know, how it gets created and how it gets delivered to the customer. You know, again, in a software environment, which is not my area of strength, you know, there's going to be infrastructure questions and distribution questions and other things like that. So making sure that you've got your head around how you would pitch your product concepts to the various different e-staff members, and, you know, making sure that you can understand what their expectations are is pretty important as well. Roadmap, fit, and positioning. This is another important topic. You know, every company has a roadmap, and if they don't, they should have. And, you know, the concept of the roadmap is to be able to see on a single piece of paper what all the products are, when they're going to be rolling out. And so you want to make sure that the product concept that you're promoting fits nicely in some kind. It's a strategic fit. It needs to, you can't sort of have something, and this kind of plays a little bit back to the core competency thing as well, but you can't have something that's just, you know, way out left field. It's got to make sense in terms of the story. And a good way to think about it is, you know, imagine that your CFO is at an investor conference and he's presenting the products to a group of investors. And, you know, the story that he tells or she tells has to make sense. You know, it's got to make sense. So you want to be able to have them put up your roadmap slide and say, okay, this product is coming out here, this product's coming out here, da 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 da. It all kind of fits together nicely. ROI is kind of an obvious one. That's very simply the financial side of the product concept. And, you know, I'm a little traditional when it comes to these kinds of things. I just kind of say, okay, you know, pick a time period that the company's comfortable with, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, and be able to show, you know, a P&L for the product category. And I would do this. I'd actually put together a P&L, and I just say, okay, it's going to cost us this much money to invest in developing the product. You know, we're going to sell this many of them. You know, the gross margins are this. You know, this is, and here's the P&L. I might do a little graph that would show, you know, the P&L over time, the ROI over time. Relative priority is also very important, and actually one that, you know, I got burned from quite a few times in my career. Somehow I'd always managed to pick the areas in a company that were a little nichey and weren't the core competency of the, not the core competency, they weren't the main product category of the company. I'd always be slightly out on the periphery a little bit. And unfortunately, what happens in situations like that, and this is free advice for all you guys, is, you know, if and when the company hits hard times, usually what happens is, you know, that they kind of hunker down and they say, okay, we're going to focus on our key product categories, and everything else is just going to get jettisoned. So understanding the relative priority of your product category in the context of the rest of the company is really an important thing. And it's not bad if it's kind of a outside of the main sort of focus of the company's product categories, but it's just important to understand it, especially as a product manager, because that's always going to, you know, if you're a lower priority product category in a big product mix in a company, it's always going to be more difficult to get the face time that you need and the mind share that you need internally inside the company and externally as well. Okay, ability to execute. This one is also kind of obvious. When you're thinking about your product, you know, one of the things that I consistently came up against during my career was you could have the best product idea in the world, you could show that it's going to make tons of money, you could, you know, it could be strategically a great fit, you could, you know, it's just this amazing opportunity, and you've done all the research and da 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 da. But if you don't have a group of engineers that can roll their sleeves up and actually develop the thing for you, then you got a problem. So, you know, and a lot of companies, well, every company I've ever worked at, that, you know, I was never in a situation where there was a room full of engineers sitting around twiddling their thumbs with nothing to do, saying, hey, give us a project, you know, we're just sitting here, we're bored, you know. So, you know, trying to understand how you can resource your product concept is also important. And that means you've got to go sit and talk to whoever the head of the development organization is, and just understand, hey, you know, as we're putting this product concept together, you know, is this, you know, how big of a task is this kind of thing going to be to make, and, you know, what's involved and how could we make it happen, kind of thing. Okay, and finally, very important is when you get to the end of the product development process and you're ready to start selling your product, you have sales guys in your organization, guys and gals, and you got to figure out how the thing's going to get sold. And I used to spend a lot of time with the sales organization. I mean, they're usually a fun group of people anyway. So, you know, and actually, I started my career in sales. Originally, I was a sales guy. I was educated as a software engineer, and straight out of college, I didn't want to do software engineering, so I went into sales. So the first 6 years of my career, I was a sales guy, which I never felt completely comfortable being a sales guy. So that's when I moved into product management. Anyway, I digress. But I always enjoy interacting with people in the sales organization because they're fun and they're interesting and they give you insights that you wouldn't necessarily get when you're sat in your cubicle, you know, surrounded by product managers and engineers. So yeah, it's good to understand where their head is at. It's good to talk to them about your product concept and say, hey, what do you think? You know, if we did X, Y, and Z, you know, do you think you could sell this? You know, what do you think it would sell for? Blah, 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 those types of things. So anyway, this is the diagram. This is the chart, the slide that I ended up drawing on that whiteboard that day many years ago when I was being interviewed by the head of engineering at 3Com Home Networking Group. And after I talked through with him, you know, what I've just talked through with you, you know, I stood back and I looked at the chart and I was like, well, you know, that's actually pretty good, you know. I think I'll write that down. So I did. But anyway, the other thing that I realized is all of these data points, the external data points and the internal data points, they're all great, but they're just data points at the end of the day. And the most important thing that you have to apply once you've pulled all of this data together is you've got to ask your gut, you know, what is this, you know, does this still make sense? Does it pass the smell test? Was an expression that was used a lot in my career. And if it does pass the smell test, then you can make your go decision. So this is it. This is what I call the product concept validation methodology, and I hope that it's helpful to you guys and that you're able to leverage some of these concepts and that it helps you as you're going through your process of your product process. Okay. The other sort of nugget of information that I always found useful is to ask yourself honestly what type of product manager you are. What kind of product manager are you? And, you know, to be able to understand the value that you bring to the organization. And I think product managers kind of break down into two macro level categories. There's kind of the visionary big picture thinker type product manager. And then there's the execution-oriented, attention to details product manager. And usually, you know, if you have a product management team, and I was fortunate that I was able to build and manage, lead numerous product management teams during my career, it's good to have a mixture of these two different sort of categories of people. Because the visionary big picture thinker people are the ones that will come up with the wacky ideas, and the execution oriented attention to details type people are the ones that will ask the difficult questions. And, you know, will you know, when you get these people together in a room, they usually butt heads with each other, but usually you're able to get some good results out of combining these two. By the way, I'm noticing in the chat window that there are some questions popping up, and I'm just going to say, by all means, please keep sending the questions over, and please, somebody remind me if I forget.